welcome to number 3 of our season previews. This time we are looking at the Sheffield Sharks. Thanks to those that have watched the London one, the Manchester one. And yeah, thank you for following us on the YouTube channel. Please hit subscribe, the bell button, whatever else you need to say for promoting your stuff. An interesting lineup to look at, for sure. A lot of familiar faces. And you know what, Louis? Hello, Louis, firstly. Hello, how are you?
Hello, Kern.
I know, sorry, I was just started. We'd already chatted. I suppose one thing that comes off the page instantly when you look at the Sheffield Sharks is that familiar look, that kind of focus that Atiba likes to have on maintaining his relationships with players like Rodney Glasgow, Prentiss Nixon, that trust in Rodney Chatman, Jordan Routinho. We could actually keep going through the list. Mike Ocharobia, who have I missed out? Dirk Williams coming back to Sheffield, for example. It's something that you could say is a positive for the Sharks in that, you know what, bringing back players that have a knowledge of the team, even the league. When we look at players like Mervin James, Riyad West coming back for a second year, William Lee, it's a roster of a lot of familiar faces.
Yeah, it's kind of unprecedented, really, the level of continuity. Like, obviously, it's going to feed into this season, make everything a lot more kind of seamless in terms of transition. So you'd hope so.
And it's, one of the big question marks I have, and I've kind of said it all summer, was it was interesting to see Rodney Chatman kind of back, because we've kind of heard that he may be struggling for the first few weeks of the season. How big an issue do you think that could be for them in terms of their depth?
Well, obviously they have, not having a guy like, Rodney, who, personally, I thought he was one of the best guards, if not the best guard in the league when he played last season.
You've never said that before, by the way, Louis.
I've never said that before.
I'm joking, of course you have.
Breaking news. So. But obviously, that starting PG spot is going to have to be filled elsewhere. all the ball handling, etc. They had Prentiss as kind of that last season. Before they got in Rodney. So Prentiss does have experience in that, and elsewhere, if you look up the lineup, they have some players that can kind of offset some of the ball handling responsibilities. So, and obviously, Rodney Chatman's such a massive, dynamic rim pressure guard. And that's kind of something that Prentiss doesn't really replicate, but a new player called Nick Kern might be able to help out with that. So
you're obviously a big fan of Nick Kern Jr., 6'6" from Penn State. Let's start there. He was obviously, I think he was been the last one they've announced. So let's start with the one they've announced last. What do you make of Nick Kern, and what can he offer the Sharks? And what do you think people looking around the league can expect from him?
Well, I have to be a little bit transparent in the fact that I may have some connection with him. But basically, Nick Kern, the key aspect that you have to have a look at is his ability to get to the rim, generate rim looks, create off the dribble looks at the rim and be able to finish. His slashing ability in a very tough level in college was tremendous. He shot a very good percentage at the rim. He's a very athletic guy that can finish above the rim. His kind of off-ball, his portability and being able to play, in addition to his ball handling ability, which, as stated about Rodney Chatman, he will be able to offset some of that. But in terms of his portability and being able to play alongside other players, his cutting ability will be something that immediately strikes the page. Think about a player like Zach Irvin, who's constantly cutting. Thinking about alongside a guard like Rodney Chatman, who's constantly pressuring the rim. If two come to the ball, or someone or Nick Kern's defender kind of shrinks the floor in on Rodney Chatman. Nick Kern's going to be on it in terms of capitalizing on chances to cut to the rim. That's kind of his thing. He's a huge he's amazing at that, and that his defensive ability is also tremendous. Like his athletic ability to kind of both make plays defensively at the rim as a secondary rim protector, and also kind of his quick hands. He's got tremendously quick and great hand-eye coordination in terms of getting steals and kind of stripping players. That's something that's it is a high-level skill for him, and he's very versatile. He can kind of guard down, kind of do various things. Like his size in our league, 6'6", pretty decent physically. He will also be able to kind of share some time at the 4 potentially. So is
that just one of his strong points when you look at someone like him? That versatility you're saying about someone who's more than adequate ball handler, someone that's able to get to the basket, someone that can defend 1 to the 4, and we've seen that a lot in recent season. That kind of bigger wing presence guarding, say, top quality point guards. Is there been an equivalent so people can relate to it across the league in previous seasons, like from other teams or in Sheffield? Has there been a similar type player?
See, someone of Nick Kern's, because I'm just thinking about the level at which he was able to, because being able to create at the high major level, like the amount of rim attempts that he did, is kind of, it kind of speaks to kind of his athletic ability. I think it will be quite hard pressed. I'd be quite hard pressed to kind of find an equivalent.
Fair.
But in terms of what you were talking about, like that versatile player, it's about, because obviously Sheffield have Prentiss, they have Rodney, they have Dirk, they have Mervin. All these guys that will demand a lot of ball handling reps, and it's about trying to find players that can facilitate off of that and kind of add value beside being on ball, which obviously Nick Kern does provide. But it's about finding players that can provide that in addition to the defensive value that he obviously provides. So yeah, that's it basically.
And I suppose when we look at the Sharks, it's a season of building on what you would term as a success. They obviously got silverware last year. They beat Surrey in the cup final. Yeah, I was going to say trophy, but definitely the cup final. And it's how they now take that into this new season. They'll have aims and ambitions to go as far as they can domestically, both across the championship and the playoffs. So who's going to be, like, when we look at the new players on that roster, probably the first one I'd like to talk about, after saying all that, because obviously talk about Nick Kern, but replacing Donovan Clay, replacing Donovan Clay is going to be massive. He was such an instrumental part to Atiba's roster last season on both ends of the ball. So how does someone like Jalen Deloach at 6'9", rookie season coming out, how can he step up to the plate?
Well, firstly, replacing someone like Donovan Clay is practically impossible, I think, with his tremendously unique skill set, but Jalen Deloach, basically his kind of offensive skill set, kind of in replacing some of what Donovan Clay provided in, Donovan Clay was a great kind of passer, playmaker, kind of, which kind of aided like the fluidity of, Sheffield's offense last season. Jalen Deloach is he's a terrific kind of, I don't know, like playmaker out like the short roll, stuff like that. If you he's got this knack of like, I don't know, he's got a really good, it's kind of strange, but he's got a really good timing on his passes. Like he, like kind of like a deceptive timing on his passes. Like because he kind of no looks and then kind of fires passes to shooters kind of aid. But he's a very good passer. He's got very good vision. You know, is that he can kind of do a little bit of dribble handoff stuff. He's kind of can be a little bit loose, but he's, you know, it's that kind of passing ability that will, you know, unlock a lot of their shooters on the roster. He can score out of the post. You know, he's a very vertically athletic guy, so he's a massive threat in terms of, you know, on the roll or in the dunker spot, you know, in finishing above the rim. You know, that's a big thing. But it's his, you know, it's his kind of passing ability, and then also like a huge part is his defensive ability, because obviously Donovan Clay was so versatile defensively. You know, you would trust him with the switch. And Jalen Deloach is another guy in that he's an incredibly like high energy guy, constantly looking to make defensive plays. You know, he has the agility to feasibly switch, you know, across multiple positions. You know, his hands in terms of getting steals, his vertical ability and timing in terms of blocks, you know, rim protecting around the rim because he's got good length. You know, he's a very good big who, yeah, I think will do well in this league, hopefully. So,
and I suppose we've touched on it already, a lot of players with a lot of experience in this league. You've got players like William Lee coming back. Dirk Williams is back in Sheffield. He's had stops in France, Manchester, London, finished the season last year in Kosovo. But let's talk about Mervin James. 6'7", played on the 89ers last year, led the league in scoring. I think that when we talk about big signings from within the league, it almost feels as if this one's been downplayed or not downplayed, but under maybe appreciated because Sheffield have brought back Dirk Williams, because Sheffield have brought in William Lee. Is that fair to say? Like, almost people are forgetting that Mervin James was like incredible last season. Like I said all season he was a top 5 player, got shot down most of the time. But yeah, Mervin James, what have you got? By you. Like you were the main culprit. So explain yourself right now. The floor is yours.
Well, I can't say that, but yeah, obviously that, you know, they've brought back, you know, Chatman, Prentiss. You know, there's so many big names to kind of compete with. It definitely does go underneath the radar, you know, and we know Mervin James as an additional, you know, creator of points is, you know, exceptionally dangerous. You know, we saw that in TBT. You know, he's great at, you know, just creating his own looks and, you know, being an additional scorer in lineups. You know, that's kind of his thing. You know, we saw it in Surrey that, you know, he was their go-to guy. You know, they could go to him out of the low block. They could go to him out of the short corner. You know, and ISO him up, and they'd you know trust it'd get them some points. You know, and that's definitely valuable. You know, so you know as an additional scorer, can't go better. Definitely.
And I suppose we look at that like William Lee last season. Played in kind of second tier Germany. A lot of players tend, when we look at where maybe the level of our pro leagues got to, we're seeing guys come. We used to see players go there quite a lot, or come from maybe even lower division down Germany up to SLB. Almost feels like that secondary season at Manchester for William Lee was a bit of a disappointment. That Manchester team largely struggled massively in terms of
statement.
It's trying to put it kindly.
Yeah.
But William Lee, I think he comes into this season with a lot to prove. Like, he's been around our game for a while, whether it's been Manchester, Leicester before that. I'm curious to see what role he has at Sheffield. Like, we'll talk about this when we go into depth chart, I suppose, in terms of starting, coming off the bench or whatever. But I'm really curious to see what you think about William Lee.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an incredibly interesting decision for Atiba, whether he wants to, you know, in the starting unit, whether he wants to go with William Lee or Mervin at the 4, whether he sees William Lee as more like a kind of like a stretch 5 replacement potentially. that's because those that with a guy like William Lee, those are the decisions you're going to make. And then obviously Mike Ocharobia, as if you're playing William Lee as more of a 4, then obviously that leaves kind of Mike Ocharobia as more, having to take up more, more of the 5 minutes. So obviously that's a decision for Atiba to make. In terms of team fit, because that Manchester squad was awful. Let's not sugarcoat it. And their coach, there's not much we can say about the quality of their coach and his ability to kind of put players into positions to succeed. And I really don't think Will Lee was put in a position to succeed, to be perfectly frank. His value, which kind of leads into kind of his role on the Sharks, is being that kind of like lower usage, kind of spot up, stretch 4-5 that will hit a very good percentage from 3, be a willing shooter, kind of stretch the floor out for other players, be willing to, offer bad closeout, take a dribble, mid-range pull up, occasionally, finish above the rim, look like from the dunker spot, etc. Occasional post reps, but mainly being that stretch big that can shoot a good percentage from 3 on good volume, and then being additional rim protector, add additional length to lineups. Kind of that's kind of his value, So that's kind of that's kind of what Atiba's hopefully, hoping for. So yeah, I think we'll hopefully get a different version than that Manchester one, because I don't think he was kind of placed in the best scenario, so to speak.
Yeah. And I suppose maybe leaving this country, going to play somewhere else, refocuses the mind and whatnot. So a question I have for you, and I've got my opinion on this, so you can answer and I'll say. I think a lot has been made over the last season and a half about almost Prentiss Nixon being the ever-present kind of franchise. What I would have used the phrase franchise player a lot. This is a big name roster. Like, there's expectations now in Sheffield, as you know. Like, you're bringing in players like Mervin James, William Lee. That's a name player. You're bringing back Dirk Williams, a massive player in terms of recent history in this country. Rodney Chatman was obviously stellar before his knee injury. I'm really curious to see what Prentiss Nixon does, because he's someone that you see how popular he is with the fans. Like, he's almost like the unofficial Mr. Sheffield, in my opinion, on this roster. Like, there's so many good highlight plays and moments last season when he took over because he kind of had to. And that was whether it was with Ricky McGill or even before that with Rodney Chatman. But this roster seems like, with who they've brought in, another maybe step up again. So where do you see Prentiss fitting in? Is he potentially a 6th man in this roster if Chapman's playing?
I don't really see it. I think he'll still be a starting. I think it's dependent on. I think probably Nick Kern's probably seen more as a 3, but I think if he kind of comes out the gates, because obviously he's going to have to, play more with Rodney Chatman. If potentially Rodney Chapman has to, lose time or whatever. Yeah. If he comes out,
do we answer this question?
That might be a question.
Yeah, do we answer this question, what I've just asked you, with the depth chart on the screen? So I said about, is Prentiss going to be 6th man? Yeah, you've said about potentially Nick Kern being at the 3. And I think this is where the question I have comes from. Because they've got so much versatility across Chapman, Nixon, Kern, Williams. Like, this was Louis came up with this depth chart before he even tries to change his mind. But like, I obviously asked.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
But that's why I asked the question. Like, this was Louis that said this initially. And you know what? I think that shows the strength of Sharks, where we could probably come up with 4 or 5 different versions of a strong starting 5. Agreed? Yes. Like, you could argue that Chapman, Nixon, Williams, Deloach, William Lee. You could swap in Mervyn James for William Lee, or you could swap in Kern for, like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's so many options. And that's going to be a massive strength for them throughout the full season. I'm really curious to see where Prentiss Nixon fits in from the start. We've put him in as a starting two guard. I'm asking the question, though, is that maybe one that he might start there, but during the season drop in and out? Obviously, it depends on fitness levels. I suspect he'll start at the one when the season starts, with Chatman maybe missing the first couple of games. Like, he's the one that Atiba will put the ball in the hands of because he knows how Atiba wants to play.
Yeah, well, because Nixon's thing is that he is that guy that, as a second option, he does play well off of another guard because of his shot making from deep and his willingness to kind of, move outside on the perimeter and be kind of like a secondary ball handler, kind of creating out of secondary pick and rolls, etc. So he does have that value as a secondary guy, and he does kind of, we saw it last season. He does work well, alongside Chatman. It would be kind of Dirk could even play at the two. He's a kind of 2-3, swingman. But I think he'll start as the season goes on at the two. But squad like lineup dynamics. Potentially if he kind of Atiba potentially, like if he goes for Mervin James at the 4. Obviously, that's additional, ball handling reps that are going to have to be shunted up the lineup.
Yeah.
So potentially, maybe you'd want to, shift, Prentiss at the 2 to, someone who doesn't demand as much of the ball or is more off ball leaning. So, like a Nick Kern or like a Nick Kern, Dirk, like 2-3 lineup or something like that, something like that.
That would be menacing. Like, genuinely seeing Kern and Williams on the court, like, could be with either Lee or James with Deloach in the middle. Like, that's an exciting lineup. Like, if we look at this roster build up by the Sharks, there's a lot of questions that we've got in terms of just even what we've just said, like how the roster combinations will work. But then let's spin that round and talk it as a positive and being like, they've got so many options when it comes to scouting Sheffield early in the season. You don't really know how you're going to scout. You're right, there's a lot of ball-hungry players. But again, like, players buy into different roles. That's where I think Prentiss is going to be so important, because I don't feel like he's someone... I feel like he's quite adaptable. And I'm curious... The questions come from, because it's like, okay, big season ahead for Sheffield. Expectations will be high. The demand for success from the ownership and the kind of club is going to be really high. And I suppose that's probably why Atiba's gone with players he knows. William Lee, Dirk Williams, for example. We keep touching it, bringing back Mike Ocharobia as well. Rodney Glasgow's been about, is this his 5th or 6th season in Sheffield? Same for Routinho. Like, these guys are ever present, and it's respectable. So if by looking at this depth chart, Louis, if you're a Sheffield Sharks fan, you've got to be excited. Like, you've just got to.
Yeah, man. If you're at the buzzer, you got to be happy, because just looking at it, because a big thing in recruitment is optionality and kind of having different, like, let's say a team throws a certain thing, it's about having like a counter to that. That you can go to, and there's so many different like lineup permutations it kind of Sheffield can go to, and so many. We don't kind of speak about this enough, but a lot of players that are just exciting to watch. It will be exciting to kind of watch a guy like Dirk, back in the league again. A guy like Mervin, because obviously at Surrey he was. He was an exciting player, Guys like Prentiss, Chatman, Kern's going to be very fun to watch. Jalen Deloach is a very athletic 5-man. It's just going to be... We don't speak on it enough, probably, but yeah, in terms of fan experience, that's going to be great,
So finishing off is what we've done on all these so far. Who is the prophecy one to watch?
I mean, we know so many of those guys,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna have to go with a new one. It will be Kern, I think. Just watch out for that guy, in the beginning of the season. That's just what I'm thinking.
I love that. So there's our Sheffield Sharks roster preview for the season. A lot of excitement ahead for what the Sharks potentially can display in the court. If you've enjoyed watching this, please subscribe, give it a like, do whatever, share with your pals, and keep getting involved. Thank you to all those, as I said at the start, who have got involved so far. This was number 3. We'll be back with our 4th preview in the next couple of days. So please, as I said, get involved, and yeah, we'll check you out next time.